In the previous video, I showed you how you could use projected curves as a means of generating surfaces from an underlying polysurface structure, in this case, for our prosthetic accessories project, In this tutorial, I'm going to show you another application or extension of that same technique, and I'm going to show you how you can use it to generate shells that can be used for a wide variety of purposes. And the final shell will look something like this. Okay, and there are a lot of different applications for this, and you could apply this to an arm, a leg, or a boot, or you could use it to do like a helmet. There are a lot of different ways that you could use this, but in each case, we are, like in the previous project, we're going to use projected curves to generate or to create a surface that conforms to an underlying surface typology. Now, the workflow, and describing the workflow, and I'm going to move over into the right window so I can describe the workflow. We're going to start out with the curves, with just curves that are drawn on top of our object to describe the contour of the shapes that we want to generate. And I want you to note that if we were to look at this in 3 space, that those are drawn along the flat plane, the flat construction plane. But they're drawn in such a way as to conform with the shape of the underlying object. From there, what we're going to do is that we're going to take those objects and we're going to pre-fillet them. We're going to pre-fillet them to fillet the edges of that object. And pre-filleting is very important, something that you should get into the habit of doing as you begin to work with curves. Once we've filleted our curves, we're then going to join this together. We're going to join this curve, this network of curves together, and we're going to project it onto our shape. We're going to project those curves onto our shape so that we get something that looks like this. And after the curves are projected onto the shape, we're going to draw lines along the straight edges of our straps right here to create boundary divisions that we're going to use when we surface this. And we're going to surface it in 2 ways. We're going to do a combination of patches. I'm going to use sweep 2 rails. You could also use curbs from 3 or 4 or more edges also to build your shape. Okay, but using this technique, we're going to generate our surface typology, which lies on top of our surface, and once we do that, we're going to join those, and you can see the different patches together. We're going to join those patches together to create a polysurface that will then extrude to get the final thickness of our object. Okay, and in doing so, we're going to create a shell that will allow us to create geometries from an underlying sort of surface typology, an underlying surface typology. It could be a polygonal surface, it could be a poly surface, it could be another surface indeed, if we wanted to do it, but it's a very powerful technique that, and actually you could probably just use this technique and a couple other things, certainly to generate your massing shapes and finally to generate the final project. Okay, so let's begin our work with our surface curves, and we're going to work with our curves that we're going to project onto our 3-dimensional object. And basically what we're going to do with this is that we're going to draw our curves, we're going to trim our curves, fillet them, fillet the edges, pre-fillet the curves, and then project them onto our object. And I hope to cover that segment in this short video. And I want you to note that if we were to look at this in perspective, that the curves lie along the construction plane, as I said before. But here in the right window, what we try to do is to draw the curves to the shapes that we want as we want them to intersect onto the face. And what we have to understand is that any curves that project beyond the distance of the face will wrap around the face when projected, okay? And so in this case, any curve right over here that projects beyond the face, that's going to wrap around, that's going to wrap around, that's going to wrap around, that's going to wrap around. But this is going to be sort of like an area of intersection. So what we want to do is that we want to take our curves, and let me show you how I go about drawing them. And you can, I'm going to draw this segment again so you can see the workflow. I use my control points curve tool, and I want to make sure that my object is off and that I've turned off any snaps. And what I want to do is that I want to draw my curve to conform to the contour that I want to use. And when I do this project, I like to draw one curve, and I like to put that curve in the middle of where I want it to be. And I know it's going to intersect this strap here, and I know it's going to lie below the ear. So in this case, I'm going to use my offset command, and I'm going to use both sides. Make sure both sides is selected and through point. Okay, so I'm going to click on both sides and through point. What this allows me to do is allows me to manually adjust that curve. And I'm going to do it in proportion to this curve here and to that one there. I could type in a value, but I like to do it intuitively. I like doing things intuitively. Okay, and now I can get rid of that curve in the center there. Now what I want to do, and making sure that my head is turned off, what I'd like to do is I like to select all of these curves. And now I want to do a trimming operation. Okay, and when I trim, I'm going to trim this back because I don't need that. Don't need this, don't need that, don't need that. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to trim out all the sections that I don't need. And feels like I have two curves there. I'm going to get rid of that a little later. Okay, and I'm going to come up here and trim this, trim that. Yes, and I indeed have two curves here. I'm going to trim that out. And I have that state right there. And let me see, I have duplicate curves someplace, so let me get rid of that now so that that doesn't keep on coming up and haunting me. And I think I might have one up there also. Okay, and so this represents sort of like the contour of the straps. Now, one of the things that I'd like to do before I join my curve is to pre-fillet them. And the way that you pre-fillet is that you go in and you run a fillet command. Okay, and I already set the value to 0.5 because I've scaled this already, and that fillets. And I can right-click to execute the command again, and it fillets. Okay, right-click, execute the command again, fillets. Right-click, execute the command again. Anytime you could pre-fillet a curve, that's a good thing because anything that happens upstream from that curve, curves yield surface, surfaces yield solids, those will all already have the fillet embedded in them, and it's a lot easier to deal with than it is to do it once you turn it into a polysurface. Sometimes that's one of the things you should get into the habit of doing. Always, whenever possible, pre-fillet your curves. Okay, and now that everything's been pre-filleted, I want to select this segment and I want to do a Control-J to join it all together. So I want all those elements joined together. Okay, and now that they're joined together, what I can do is I can select this, select everything, and now I'm ready to do a project. And I want to turn my head back on, and I'm going to create a new layer at the bottom, and I'm going to paint that layer light gray so you can see it. Or let's just go with the gray so that you can see it, and I'm going to make that the current layer. And I'm going to do a project, and with my head turned on, I'm going to project to that surface. And I got delete input there. You might not want to do that, and if you do that, you want to make sure that you have a copy. But since I'm making a video, I'm going to delete the input so I don't have to do that later. And that then projects those curves onto the surface. And it looks something like that. And let's see if I can change the color here to a light gray so that you can see that better. And so you can see that those curves are projected onto the surface. Okay, and I'm going to pause this for a second because the next step that I have to do now is that I have to go in and rebuild all my curves, because you never want to build surfaces or work with projected curves to build surfaces and to work upstream. You always want to project, then rebuild. Project, then rebuild. And because anytime you use a projected curve to build from, it creates nightmares as you go upstream. And in the next part of the video, I'm going to make that really clear why that happens.